Mr. Nolder, Jason, Ms. Stevens, prosecution team. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
Good morning.
First and foremost, I want to thank you. I want to thank you because you started this process by raising your right hand and taking an oath. And that oath was that you wouldn't draw any conclusions or make any assumptions or talk about the case or deal with the case until you go to deliberations. I've been busy, but I've tried to watch you, and I do believe you've kept that oath, and I thank you for that, because without you keeping that oath, and without you participating in civic duty, we wouldn't have the best criminal justice system in the world. So once again, I thank you. December 4th, 2020, ladies and gentlemen. It's a tragic day. It's a sad day. It's a tragedy that affects this courtroom, ladies and gentlemen. It affects this side of the courtroom. It affects this side of the courtroom. Somebody lost a son and a grandson, a brother, a friend on December 4th, 2020. Somebody has to deal with the sanctity of life and the preserving life versus the occupation. And December 4th, 2020, ladies and gentlemen, also will affect you if it hasn't already. You'll take a piece of that with you for the rest of your life. Everyone in this courtroom is going to take that with them and say, geez, December 4th, 2020 in the future. Okay? And own that, because you're human beings. It affects people differently. The judge told you in the beginning we have a job to do, the different jobs associated with us. Your job's just getting ready to get started, the hard part. So in order to do that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go over our case and our witnesses' credibility versus the government's case and the government's witnesses' credibility. And I'm going to draw the distinctions. I'm going to point out the consistency and corroboration, ladies and gentlemen, with our case and with Jason Meade. So let's start right there, okay, with Jason Meade. Tour in Iraq for Lima Company after 9/11. Honorable discharge. A pastor, an employee of a government in law enforcement for 17 years. Now, let's compare what Jason Meade perceived that day versus Jason Meade's statement that he gave 2 weeks after the December 4th, 2020, without seeing videotapes, without seeing body cams, without seeing anything, because he gave his side of what he remembers. And let's compare that to the physical evidence, and let's compare that and see where there's corroboration and there's consistency. Remember in voir dire, we talked about credibility. Credibility. I talked to you about it, I said, yeah, if something's corroborated, if something's consistent, that makes it credible. Well, ladies and gentlemen, credibility and corroboration is not a coincidence. It just doesn't happen by luck. So let's go over the points that Jason Meade put out in his statement that have been corroborated and confirmed and occurred. First one, geez, I'm at the intersection, okay? And that's what this case is about, ladies and gentlemen. The interaction between my client and Mr. Goodson, from the interaction to the door. All the other stuff are distractions, ladies and gentlemen. So what does he tell you he sees at the intersection? I'm at the light, okay? I see a car coming. I see a person waving a gun. I see this. So what does he do, okay? So the issue is, do you believe more likely than not that my client saw a gun at that intersection at Carl and Ferris, okay? So how is that corroborated? Well, geez. He describes it in his statement, ladies and gentlemen, as an extended mag. I could see an extended magazine. Someone who's trained on arms, someone who's trained on those types of things, and they're trained, ladies and gentlemen, to look for the unexpected. They're leaving, they're clearing the scene. He's trained. He sees a guy waving a gun. That's not normal. Doesn't matter what time of day or anything, that's not normal. He watches that. So how is that confirmed, ladies and gentlemen, with physical evidence? There's a gun found at the scene, ladies and gentlemen. It's there, out on the body. The government confirmed it for us because they put the Casey gun owned. and certified it and authenticated that in fact it was an extended magazine gun. Corroborated? Yes. Consistent? Yes. What does Jason Meade tell you, and in his statement, about what does he do when he sees it? He airs immediately to his team. He communicates with the only device he has with his walkie-talkie and tells them, I got a guy waving a gun, okay? He immediately does that. Now, is this corroborated and confirmed? Who? Yes, Deputy David Youngless. I'm at the Wendy's. I hear the call, guy with a gun. He says, Jay, is it our guy? No, it's not. Why? Because Jason Meade had dealings with Mr. Barber before. Okay? So, guy with a gun waving. Where are you? He gives a site. And we know that that happened, ladies and gentlemen. We know that it happened because they all respond. So, when Jason Meade puts in a statement that I aired over the walkie-talkie, a guy with a gun, right there, that defeats any indication that Mr. Merkel would say somehow that this was a cover-up. Because if it's a cover-up, then he must have started it at the intersection. That's how preposterous their case is. That's how desperate they are. That they would term that when he walks out to the light that it's a cover-up. Well, geez, let me think. I'm going to do this in the next 3 or 4 minutes, so I'm going to pretend to air that I saw someone waving a gun. Come on. And it's confirmed by Deputy Youngless. Jason Meade in his statement, the purpose of the statement is to say, this is what happened, this is what I saw. And you heard Art Hughes, his purpose is to poke holes in that statement. In the statement, he says, when I saw the person at the end of the street, he had a gun in one hand and a bag in the other. Again, somehow Jason Meade is clairvoyant and knows. Now, again, how do we prove that? The government proved it for us with the picture of the bag. Jason Meade doesn't see any discovery. He has no evidence or anything like that when he writes this out. But he says, 2 weeks after, I saw a bag in one hand and that in the other. But the cover-up started at the intersection. He says in his statement, ladies and gentlemen, that I did a U-turn. Is that confirmed? Yes, by the video. Does Jason Meade know when he writes a statement that there's a video? No, nobody does. He does a U-turn to pursue it. Do you think someone who's done a tour in Afghanistan for 7 months for the Lima Company is going to make up the fact that, oh, geez, yeah, I did a U-turn? No. How's it confirmed? Rosser confirms it. I'm sitting behind Jay. I see him turn. I think, oh, geez, he left something back at the scene. Happens sometimes. All right? But it's confirmed by a video and by Brian Rosser. The U-turn. Next. In his statement, he says, I stop and talk to Ryan Rosser. I stop quickly and talk to Ryan Rosser. He tells you that on the stand. How's that confirmed, ladies and gentlemen? By the video. You see him pause. Even Mr. Cornish, they said, oh, that's where he paused. And he says, guy with a gun. He communicates. He's got to go. He thinks Rosser, Jason tells you, he thinks Rosser hears this because he aired it over the marshal's channel. Ryan took his communication off. Okay, is that reasonable? Yeah. Does that make sense? Is it confirmation that he stopped and told something to Ryan Rosser? Yes. The video shows that, and Ryan Rosser. Confirmation. He tells in a statement, I point to the guy and say, there's the guy with the gun. Who confirms that? Ryan Rosser. Ryan Rosser says, yes, as I pulled up, get my stuff on, Jay goes, there's the guy with the gun. I look down. The guy looks at me. That's confirmed, ladies and gentlemen, and that's consistent. Consistency is not a coincidence. Corroboration is not a coincidence, ladies and gentlemen. Next, he yells, He says in a statement, I issued commands. I yelled, drop the gun, show me your hands. U.S. Marshal, I yelled multiple things, multiple times. How was that corroborated? 2 ways. Sheila Staniford. So somehow Sheila Staniford hears commands. Show me your hands, show me your hands. 3 times she says. And then she says, I heard shots. Mr. Merkel was, well, you heard the shots first, then the commands, right? She's like, no. Why would I lie? She heard commands and did that. And he has the audacity to get up here and say this was a cover-up? That, gee, somehow I'm going to pretend that there's a gun up at the scene. I'm going to pretend this. I'm going to do this. Then I'm going to pretend that I yell commands, but yet Sheila Staniford hears the commands. That's how desperate they are. Who else hears the commands? Ryan Rosser. He hears them as he's pulling up in the car, and he hears them. Can't tell you exactly. He hears the commands, then he hears the shots. Corroboration, confirmation. Let's go to another topic with regards to credibility, ladies and gentlemen. Credibility, okay? Remember Sergeant Stanley testified at the scene. There was an issue. He's like, hey, talks with the other detectives. We got an issue. We got a magazine that holds 30 on Jason's rifle. We only have six shell casings. Hey, have we missed another shell casing? What have we done? Well, let's ask Jason. Jason, how many do you start with? He says 29. That's a mathematical certainty. If there's 23 left in the magazine, and you start with 29, and guess what? There's 6 shell casings found. And he tells you what? And the people who testify with the weapon, if you pull that trigger on fully auto, you have no idea how many bullets come out. No idea how many bullets come out. One pull, it could be 3, it could be 4, it could be 5, it could be 10. It depends how long. So again, mathematical certainty, 1 + 1 = 2. There is no doubt. And again, you know he's telling the truth because he doesn't know what they're talking about. They ask him a question, hey, how many do you normally start in your magazine? He said 29. There's 23 left, and oh geez, this whole cover-up, there's 6 shell casings left, this whole cover-up. It's a mathematical certainty. Where else is he corroborated? By the physical evidence that doesn't lie. That's physical evidence. 23 bullets left, started with 29, there's 6 shell casings. What else is physical evidence? He tells you in his statement, and he tells you when he testifies where he was approximately when he had to fire his weapon. When the gun came back towards him, not turned all the way around like Mr. Goals, when the gun came back towards him, and there's an imminent threat facing him, an immediate threat facing him, he moves to the left, goes and fires, okay? So he tells you where he is, right? And he tells that in his statement. Geez, where are all the shell casings in those pictures, ladies and gentlemen? They're all to the right. Who confirms that every single person who testified about ejection, they go to the right, ladies and gentlemen? They go to the right. Physical evidence confirming and corroborating my client's statement from 2 weeks after. No access to any of this stuff. None. You heard Detective Hughes say no. Consistent with physical evidence. The government helps us and proves one on our own that we didn't even have to worry about. And that's when Mr. Schroyer started his cross-examination of my client saying, you said that a northbound car came through, right? In your statement. My client says yes. Hasn't seen the video, shows it. Mr. Schroyer goes, whoa, where's the northbound car? Jason goes, it just went by. A northbound car went by before Casey Goodson's car turned in there. Yes. Well, you can't see that on the video. They back up the video, and you guys see the northbound car goes, and Casey Goodson goes. They proved that for us, and that was in Jason Meade's statement. How many times do you think the 3 of these people have watched that video? How many times do you think they've gone back and forth? They've clipped it, they've cropped it, they've done it. They put their little circles on it, and Mr. Schroyer was even wrong about that. But yet Mr. Merkel stands up here and says, because Jason Meade said, I was wrong. about that the car actually stopped in front of me versus a slowed down and continuous turn. I was wrong about that. Is it reasonable? They've had the video for 2-3 years, and he misses that. My client says, yeah, well, I asked him, why do you think you're mistaken? Well, I was focused on the gun. That's why he flinched when he went like this, when he turned to the side. I was focused on the gun. That's their big Perry Mason moment, ladies and gentlemen, that in a 10-page statement, that's the only inconsistency or only thing that's not exact to the video, exact to the physical evidence, from the time of the interaction at the scene until the doorway. Northbound. Jason didn't have the advantage of watching the video over and over, ladies and gentlemen, when he gave a statement. He didn't have that advantage. Mr. Merkel talks about the credibility of Mrs. Payne. We're not, no, absolutely. Mrs. Payne is credible, Sharon Payne. She's even so credible, ladies and gentlemen, that they asked her a question about, well, when he rides, you ride with him in the car, yes. Yeah. Does he have the gun? Yeah, he usually always has the gun with him. Well, it's uncomfortable for him when he keeps it in his holster, so he brings it out. Then they ask, well, does he ever point it? No, he never pointed. But she tells you, she's honest about, yeah, it's uncomfortable. That's why he doesn't ride with it. And then what do we have to do because they asked that type of question? Mr. Nolder has to get up here and show a picture of her grandson to someone who just testified, who they just played the 911 call to you, okay? And he has to say, who's this in the picture? That's Casey. Where is he? He's in a car. What's he doing? He has a gun. What's he doing with that gun? He's pointing it. That exhibit will be back there for you. That exhibit. So that's what they do, ladies and gentlemen. Do we think Miss Payne's not credible? No, we know she is. Because she's the one that tells you it's uncomfortable. He doesn't use it. He doesn't keep his gun in his holster in the car because it's uncomfortable. Want to have it both ways, ladies and gentlemen. They want to play on your emotions and play a 911 tape about what occurred after, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing during the intersection until the use of force was done. Nothing. Their whole closing, ladies and gentlemen, was about what was before and what was after. That's not the analysis of this case, ladies and gentlemen. How do we know that Jason's telling the truth? How do we know that he's credible? He was asked, did you put your siren on? No. He was asked, did you put your lights on? I don't know. I don't know. Ladies and gentlemen, someone who is lying tells you, I'm 99% sure I turned my lights on. We asked them, when you were at the scene, did you turn your lights when you were pursued? They asked him, did you turn your lights on when you were pursuing Casey Goodson? I don't know. Did you turn your siren on? No, I know I didn't turn my siren on. So a lie, ladies and gentlemen, is, yeah, I'm 99% sure I turned my lights on. Oh yeah, I definitely turned my lights on. Yeah. And then you're shown that your lights weren't on. That's a lie. But when you say, I don't know, that's being honest. Watch the video, the full video, not the cropped one, the full video when Jason Meade goes towards the intersection. You'll see that it's 8 to 10 seconds, depending on how you count. Close your eyes when you go back in the jury room. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000, 7, 1,000, 8, 1,000. Open your eyes and imagine what you see to the left, to the center, to the right, in an intersection at Carl and Ferris. Okay, 8 to 10 seconds. Then write down what you saw without revealing anything. Okay? Everyone will have something a bit incorrect, but the basics will be there. The vantage point of my client was there for 8 to 10 seconds, observing Mr. Goodson's car, his attention directed to it, observing him go here, observing it going like this. Once again, they had it for 3 years and they get it wrong about what happens in the video, ladies and gentlemen. The cross-examination of my client was, geez, another Perry Mason moment. Geez, you said today, Mr. Meade, that Casey Goodson was running from you when he was at the car and went to the house. He was running back to the side house. Yeah, I said, right. running. But in your statement, you used moving quickly. There you go, moving quickly versus running. Then they go over and over with Ryan Rosser with regards to him describing how he was eluding or fleeing. Each of them saw what they saw and described, okay? But the issue is, the concept is, ladies and gentlemen, are they confirmed and corroborated that the guy was eluding them, evading them? There's the guy with the gun. Rosser says, I turn, he looks at me, and then he bolts, he flees. So does Jason Meade. Running versus moving quickly. Based on their training, ladies and gentlemen, every witness said this, if someone sees you and knows you're there and they leave, they're evading you. They're trying to elude you. Every police officer said that, ladies and gentlemen, because they're trained to look for that. This case isn't about whether he took his first step. Okay, when they asked Mr. Rosser, how did he take that first step? Did he run? It's a progression, ladies and gentlemen. We just went over, ladies and gentlemen, from the intersection to there, everything that was confirmed and corroborated on behalf of my client's testimony and statement. And yes, by the physical evidence. Now, let's go over talking about someone. Mr. Meade was consistent and credible and corroborated. Outside corroboration, not just himself. All right, now who in this trial could provide you with no corroboration? Who in this trial can give you neither consistency or confirmation? Who in this trial, geez, Mr. Korn, AKA Facebook poster, AKA the deleter, AKA I'm second place with 116 points on following Tamala Payne's we're friends on Facebook. That person. Let's look at him, ladies and gentlemen, and see what corroborates his testimony, if it's consistent with the physical evidence, as Mr. Merkel says. Well, he was unique because you got an instruction before he testified. That doesn't normally happen. There's a separation of witnesses. You got an instruction because he's watched the trial. He's watched Sheila Stedelberg. He's watched our client. He's watched the news. He's watched everything. It would be like taking someone in the back of the courtroom and plucking them in and say, hey, what'd you see that day? That's how desperate they are. That's their witness. They put that type of evidence on. Let's look at just his vantage point. Let's take it there. Forget the other stuff for a second. Let's just take his vantage point, okay? As he pulls out, he's in position 2. He's behind Jason Meade. Now, initially, he tells Mr. Merkel on February the 7th, oh yeah, I saw Casey Goodson's car. How do you use his name, Casey? I saw Casey Goodson's car on Carl. He doesn't tell that to the FBI. And he doesn't tell that to you. Mr. Nolder brought that out. Not them, Mr. Nolder. Then what happens is, he's, now, when you watch the video, use your common sense. Don't leave it in here. Take it back with you. You'll see that his car never actually stops. He kind of rolls, okay? I submit to you, using your common sense, that we have all approached the intersection rolling, and at some point, ladies and gentlemen, your attention's gotta be on the car in front of you, so you don't hit it. You gotta come to some type of almost stop. So I think it's reasonable to believe that you have to look at the car in front of you, right? Then look at his vantage point. Look at his vantage point, okay? And use the counter, okay? And again, your memory will be better than mine back there when you go, but use the counter. When I use the counter, from the time Casey Goodson's car turned around the front of my client's car, 1,1002. Close your eyes. 1,1002. Imagine how fast that is. Look at the video. That's the vantage point, and that's the time that Chris Korn had to see in this situation. But it doesn't really matter, ladies and gentlemen, because he's watched everything else. He's watched everything. He told you he heard about the AirPods. So why would he say that he was dancing and stuff, Mr. Merkel wants to say? Because he heard that. He heard about the music. He saw it on the trial. Look at the 2 seconds. Now, the FBI shows him the video. Mr. Merkel, Mr. Short, Mr. Schraw interview him the day before. They don't show him the video, but the FBI does. Let's just listen to what he says in that video, or that audio tape, I'm sorry, in his tape recorded statement with the FBI. Well, put yourself in his shoes, ladies and gentlemen. We have that a lot. Put yourself in his shoes. The FBI is coming to interview you. You feel nervous? Yeah, geez, not every day you're interviewed by the FBI, right? What's he tell the FBI? Well, the guy made a wide turn. Okay. Look on that video, show me where the wide turn is, ladies and gentlemen. Now they're gonna talk about a brick wall, they're gonna talk, no. You can see the car turn, there's no wide turn. What else does he say? Oh, geez, he almost hit me. You can't have it both ways. Either he makes a wide turn or he almost hits you. Because a wide turn, you're not gonna hit him. And again, 1/1002. This is what he's saying, okay? This is the time frame. Now, the best one is when he tells the FBI, they ask him, well, how'd you know that these guys were law enforcement? He goes, well, because they had their lights on. He had his lights on. That's a problem at the intersection, because he doesn't. And they ask him, are you sure? He goes, I'm 99% sure that he had his lights on, because that's how I knew. Blue light, this light. Now, after meeting with the prosecutors, he changes that a little bit on the stand. Well, it was a brake light. No. He tells the FBI he's 99% sure that the only way I knew they were in law enforcement is because Jason Meade had his lights on, the ones above, the ones on the side, and stuff like this. He even talks about that in the interview. Well, are you sure? Then they show him the video. No lights on. And he goes, well, maybe during the U-turn. No. That's their cooperation. That's their witness. He must have only seen the part of the trial where Mr. Merkel showed multiple times of Jason putting lights on at the end. At the end of the thing, after medics or anything like that. So, of course, yeah, his lights were on. That's why he says it, ladies and gentlemen. He's told about the pains and perjury of talking to the FBI, and you need to be truthful. And the very last question is there anything else that you think is important? Anything else that you think? Do you have any contact with a family? Anything else important? Chris Korn says, nope. Nope. He doesn't tell him that he posts directly instant messages to Malapane 4 times. He doesn't tell him that he comments, likes, loves, things of that nature. Thumbs up. Caring emojis. He doesn't tell the FBI that. He doesn't tell the FBI that he's at 116 points. He's almost a top point getter for 1 week. This is the week of January 28th. That's 3 days before this trial even ever started with evidence. Opening statements were on January 31st, ladies and gentlemen. He's posting and responding to their site on January 28th, 29th, the 30th. He keeps posting the 31st, the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd. He's ahead of one of the other Payne family members. He's in 2nd place at 116. Now, I don't think I need to say that to the federal government. But that's reasonable, Mr. Merkel says. That's reasonable that he didn't tell them that. That's not doing the right thing, ladies and gentlemen. That's not doing the right thing. Instead, what does he do, ladies and gentlemen? They interview him on the 7th, the prosecutions. He's interviewed by the FBI on the 8th, and what does he do on the 9th, he tells you? Yeah, I'm going to delete everything. I'm going to delete everything. That's doing the right thing. People don't delete things who are transparent. You don't delete something unless it's a problem. You don't delete something unless you're making it up. You don't delete that. You don't delete stuff if you want to be the 15-minute fame. You don't. But now we know why he deleted it, ladies and gentlemen. And again, this is their witness, contradicting himself. He tells Mr. Nolder, well, I guess I shouldn't have done that. Really? Do the right thing. Really? Let's also look what he says. Now, this gets into the details, okay? Let's take his statement apart. His statement to the 3 prosecutors and his statement to the FBI. Number 1, they said, well, can you describe him? Describe what he looked like. Well, first he says it's a female. he says, oh, split second. Keep track of the split seconds. Then he says, yes, the person had an afro. You know that Mr. Merkel just showed you that he had a do-rag on. You know from the pictures that he had a hood on. You know that a do-rag can't show an afro. 0 for 1 he is. That's in the first interview. In the second interview, the FBI asked him, well, describe him to us. Well, he had a ponytail. Didn't have a ponytail. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Korn can't even corroborate himself. He can't even be consistent himself from one day to the next because it's not true. First it's an afro, then it's a ponytail. And you guys know from the evidence, he had a do-rag on. You can't see that. But Chris Korn needs you to believe that. He's got to add those things in there, ladies and gentlemen, because he's doing the right thing. They know. They know. Now, did they ask him about social media? No. Did the FBI ask him about social media? No. We did. And he knows coming to the deposition on Monday at our office that he's already deleted this stuff. He knows. They're there. They know how biased he is, but they still put him on, ladies and gentlemen, because their case is terrible. Desperate. He says 99% 3 times in the interviews. The first time is with the lights. The second time is I'm 99% sure that I came back out of states. Oh, really? Tells that to Mr. Merkel, tells that to the FBI. The FBI then shows him, and guess what? He's wrong again. So far he's used 99% 2 times, and he's been wrong about both of them. So even 99%. Likes, cares, emojis. Now, what was really striking, ladies and gentlemen, was on the cross-examination with Mr. Nolder, okay? This is using your common sense and the credibility of a witness, that an instruction was given to you, is he says, man, yeah, when I was at there, I was at the park down in Estates for about 10 minutes, give or take some. And he goes, then I looked and I saw this person who scared or spooked me. Ladies and gentlemen, we've all been in that situation where you get scared or startled or you get spooked by something. And what do? You then look at it. You then describe it. You then go, oh, geez, that's in later. Mr. Nolder asked him, can you tell me what she looked like? No. Can you tell me what she had on? No. Can you tell me where she was in the house? No. Can you tell me where the car is? No. He can give you no details about that. Now, but the government wants you to believe that, oh, he was dancing and singing and stuff like this and could see all that stuff in 1002 with this. What else does he say? Well, geez, there was one hand on the wheel. No, there was no hands on the wheel. There were both hands on the wheel. One hand here. Multiple. But he can give you nothing about the person who scared him, and he was looking at them and he realized, yeah, that she's taping me. And he's looking directly at them. 0 information. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason we asked him about the post on December 18th of 2020, this is 2 weeks after the incident, 2 weeks. The reason we asked him about that is because it's important. And the reason we asked him about that, ladies and gentlemen, in Mr. Nolder's last question, ladies and gentlemen, his last question to him, tell me in verbatim what the post read, okay? I said I was there. I was behind Jason Meade, and I saw the victim come by, and I said I followed down the street. I didn't see anything. That's what he posted on December 18th of 2020. That's what he posted. And he deleted that because he's trying to deceive you, and he's trying to hide stuff, and they put him on, and they know it. And Mr. Merkel says that, I think he acted reasonably. Well, if he acted reasonably, ladies and gentlemen, then we've proven more likely than not, we've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jason Meade acted reasonably. Mr. Merkel gets up here and said, I think he acted reasonably. Very important, ladies and gentlemen. Are you going to rely upon the word of Christopher Korn for a surgery for a child or care for an elderly parent. Because that's proof beyond a reasonable doubt, ladies and gentlemen. Is that the type of evidence you're going to rely upon that's not corroborated, inconsistent, made up? He can't even get it straight after watching the trial, ladies and gentlemen. Is that what you're going to rely upon in the most important of your fellows? Very important in this case, ladies and gentlemen, what's in the jury instructions versus what's not in the jury instructions. So let's change gear with that. What's in the jury instructions, ladies and gentlemen, that you have and you read is you only are to judge Casey Goodson's conduct perceived by my client from the time of the intersection to the shooting. That's conduct. There will be no whys in there, ladies and gentlemen. There will be, why did Casey do this? Why didn't he abide by the commands? Why didn't he stop after the commands? Why didn't he do something? And Mr. Merkel knows that. He just got up here and told you the whys of the case, like in voir dire. This isn't about why somebody did something. This is about actions perceived, things that are looked at in my client's shoes. They talk about in their opening the whys and stuff like that. There is nothing in the whys, ladies and gentlemen. It's all a distraction, ladies and gentlemen. It does everything that he talked about in his closing was before. The dentist, the subway, the commercial driver's license. None of that is known to Jason Meade. This case is analyzed on what Jason Meade saw at that intersection there to the house. It's all distraction because that's all they have, ladies and gentlemen. There's no reasons why a person flees. It's if you see the act of evading. We talked in voir dire about no shoulda, coulda, woulda. I counted 6 times, ladies and gentlemen, that Mr. Merkel said the reasonable officer should have done or could have done in his closing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the actual jury instruction, you'll have it back there on page 8, says, the relevant legal consideration is not what the defendant officer should have known or should have done, but whether the reasonable police officer placed in his shoes could have believed about the situational need to use deadly force. Could have believed. And they still keep doing it. The experts both agreed you can't do shoulda, coulda, woulda. We talked about that in voir dire. And they keep doing it, even in their closing. Kevin Davis puts you inside of Jason Meade's shoes. Jason Meade puts you inside of his shoes in his testimony, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing in the jury instructions will say you're to do it from Casey Goodson's perspective. What was his intent? What was this? What was this? And that's all their closing argument was. Oh, geez, 6 shots. How could safety on how could you? No. That's not the legal consideration. The judge told you in there, you can't use hindsight. That's all Mr. Schroyer did with Jason Meade's cross. You didn't tell Ryan Rosser to put a siren on, right? You didn't tell Ryan Rosser to get on the loudspeaker. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. You didn't wait to verify a plate, did you? No, there's no leads in his car, and verifying the plate, it would come back to a female, not a male who's driving it, who's parked the wrong way, who runs to not to the front of the house, but the side of the house. You didn't do this, you didn't do that. That's their whole cross, ladies and gentlemen. What you also won't find in the jury instructions, ladies and gentlemen, most importantly, that their expert opined on forever, are tactics. You won't find anything in there about tactics, ladies and gentlemen. The word tactic will not appear. You know what else won't appear? Reasonably accepted police practices. Because the judge gives you the law here. You have the law. You have the law on justification and the calculus of reasonableness. You know what's not in the jury instructions, ladies and gentlemen, is what Jason Meade did not say. Did not say. Remember when Mr. Schroyer got up here in opening and he said, silence is powerful. Silence is powerful. And they try to deceive you with the last clip. Mr. Meade's answer, ladies and gentlemen, but for us, we played the whole tape. They played a clip. The question that was asked, that was brought out from the Minerva Park officer, the question that was asked on his body camera was, What was the call? How did I miss the call? That's the question Jason's trying to answer to Officer Phillips. They don't bring in Officer Phillips. That's the question that was trying to answer. We exposed that. We shed light on that. The question that was asked is, how did I miss the call? What was the call? The call was continuously, and he told you, he radioed it at the intersection, a guy with a gun, he radioed it as he was going down States. That's what the call was. Guy with a gun, waving a gun, pointing a gun. The question wasn't, why did you fire your weapon? That's not the question. But that's how desperate they are, ladies and gentlemen, that they have to just give you a clip and say, here's what Jason Meade's answer was, and they don't even give you the question. Mr. Merkel talked about playing fair in voir dire, playing fair. Playing fair, ladies and gentlemen, is when a coroner who's a forensic pathologist, who's certified, who testified, it is impossible to say which shot was first. Impossible. He gets up here and contradicts with some theory that he believes the first 3 shots were these. It's impossible, the coroner said. But they just keep going. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Meade told you once he found out that the person who was placed in a situation, who put the gun back towards him, who he shot, was someone's nephew in the house. He told you how that made him feel. He told you that people react differently, ladies and gentlemen, when they're in use of force. Some people throw up afterwards. Some people get mad. Some people don't. Some people get angry, aggressive. Some people get nervous. Everybody reacts differently. But he told you because he just learned that it was someone's nephew in the house, he thought about his family and potentially lots of his family, and that he just had to shoot someone. And he has to tell his son on his birthday that I was placed in a situation where I had to make a split-second decision. And how's that going to affect my son? Not, geez, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. And especially on my son's birthday. No, but that's how they twist it. What definitely is in the jury instructions, and you heard it already, is the testimony of one witness, if believed by you, is sufficient to prove, ladies and gentlemen, any disputed fact. Testimony of you, okay? Mr. Merkel's right. There's only one person who saw the gun came back, and that was my client, okay? But that happens in our society, all right? Under their theory, one of us was walking down an alley, and we got robbed, and there was no cameras, no anybody there to see it getting robbed, but I pick out the person, and I say to the police, that's the person. That wouldn't be good enough for them, because there's no other witness to the robbery. One witness, if believed by you, ladies and gentlemen, did the gun come back. He's the only witness that was there in that vicinity when the gun came back. Yes. But that doesn't make it any less credible, ladies and gentlemen. That's why that jury instruction's in there. Ladies and gentlemen, our case was consistent and was corroborated in every aspect. The fairy tale that they want to tell you about where the gun was, that there was no gun at the intersection, there was no gun, that type of stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, they've put nothing in the record. That's closing arguments. They've put nothing in the record disputing that the gun came back. Zero. Not one witness said, in my belief, the gun couldn't have come back. Zero. Nothing contradicts that. Just their creative fantasy arguments. Now, let's look at that. Geez, the holster, okay? 2 people said, Rosser said, I used that holster. It doesn't come out. Could come out, might not come out. Hugh says yes. It doesn't matter, ladies and gentlemen, because of physical evidence. There is no blood on the holster. There is nothing there. And think about the clothing that was worn. Okay? There's blood on the gun. Think about the clothing that was worn. Underwear, shorts, pants, okay? A t-shirt, sweatshirt. You see the picture of the sweatshirt and think, the sweatshirt's down here. If the gun was in the holster, it never comes out underneath the sweatshirt, ladies and gentlemen. But again, it's not about that. That's after. It's about whether or not, and my client did see the gun turn back towards him. That's a distraction, ladies and gentlemen. How do we get here, ladies and gentlemen? How do we get in this situation? Because the government starts with a premise and works backwards. What do I mean by that? Ms. Stevens told you in her opening that they started from a premise and worked backwards. 6 shots in the back and silence. And Casey Goodson's not a threat. That's what they told that they were going to prove to you, okay? 6 shots in the back, silence, and Casey Goodson wasn't a threat. What happens when you start from a premise and you work backwards, ladies and gentlemen, is you hired an expert after the fact who doesn't know Ohio law, who doesn't tell you definitions, all right? And you indict someone for 3 competing theories, all right? And then what happens in your case is your own witnesses, ladies and gentlemen, contradict your theory of the case. Your own witnesses contradict your theory of the case. So that's their theory, right? He's not a threat, silence, 6 shots, 6 shots, 6 shots, 6 shots. All right, well, who's the first group that contradicts them? Officer Rippey, Detective Williams, and Detective Kroom. They all tell you if you see someone waving a gun, you have a lawful authority to pursue. You must pursue. You must investigate. They all tell you that if you see someone with a gun eluding you, you have to go forward. You have to go forward. They all tell you that their actions as an officer are based on whatever the suspect's actions are. You have to react to the suspect's actions, okay? All 3 of them say that. All 3 of them say, can someone be a threat if their back is facing you and they have a gun? Yes. They're not a deadly threat yet, but yes. And they all told you after Mr. Merkel asked questions, if the gun came back, they even interrupted, I would shoot. They all told you that based on their training, if the gun came back, they would shoot. That goes against theirs. The second person, ladies and gentlemen, you heard them tell about how fast someone can turn. They all said, if someone has a gun and their back is towards you, are they still a threat? Yes, because of the quickness, because of the sudden turns. That's their witnesses. The next one, ladies and gentlemen, is the coroner, okay, Dr. Shepler. Now again, the audacity to say to even give you an idea of which shots are the first goes against 100% of what she testified to. It's impossible, and she's a forensic pathologist. If anyone would know, she would, and it's impossible. Now, it's not that complicated, ladies and gentlemen. You don't need a big demonstration. I asked the doctor, if you're facing this way, and she pointed out the wounds, 1, 2, 2 up here, 2 over here. Those entrance wounds were all what? Back to front, right to left, and upward, correct? So if the body's positioned, doctor, the entrance wounds are consistent with the bullets coming this way. She said, yes. Doctor, you don't know the position at the time, do you? She has no idea, access to discover anything like that. No. You have no idea how the body was positioned. Correct. Doctor, if the body was turned this way, and the same wounds, the same entrance wounds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The same entrance wounds, ladies and gentlemen, was this way. Would that be consistent from the bullets coming this way? Yes, it would be consistent. It's that simple, ladies and gentlemen. And think about it. She doesn't have Jason Meade's statement. She doesn't have anything like that. She has not. It's that simple. Their own witness contradicts their theory of the case. Right to left, back to front, upward. Using your common sense, that kind of matches with what Jason Meade says in his statement, but somehow there's a cover-up. Now the cover-up involves Dr. Shepler and my client on the positioning of the body. My client told you when he was facing away, could you see the gun? No. Did my client shoot then? No, because he couldn't see the gun. But when the body turned, and my client never said he turned and faced him. My client said he turned. The gun came towards me. Using your common sense, ladies and gentlemen. And don't get distracted by impossibilities. Their own expert, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Stoughton. They're his words, ladies and gentlemen. They're his words. And his words, ladies and gentlemen, are, if Mr. Goodson did turn and point a firearm, Deputy Meade's decision to shoot was appropriate, reasonable, and consistent with generally accepted police practices. They're his words. He agrees in his report. Now, what does he tell you? But he has to testify for however long, you know, let's see, $3.85 an hour. He's got between 40 and 50 hours, so I did 45. Then he's got 8 hours last week plus travel, so I did 8, 9. Then he's got 8 hours yesterday and travel, that and that. So that's about 70 hours. And you times that by 385, and it's $26,950 to tell you that. He's not an expert in Ohio, never trained anybody in Ohio, doesn't have any police training in Ohio. Compare that with Kevin Davis, 33 years as a police officer in Ohio, OPATA certified, trainer of the year. Thousands of people he's trained on use of force and deadly use of force. Kevin Davis definitely knows the definition of deadly force in Ohio. This guy comes from another state and says, sorry, I'm in Ohio, can't do it. I don't know the Ohio definition. You don't take the time to respond to my partner. You don't take the time to look up the definition of deadly force in Ohio. That's their expert, not me. No, that's not what I can't do that. I can't do that. He was retained after the indictment, ladies and gentlemen. And he gives you no evidence contrary. They were waiting for it. Oh, I have this, I have something from the coroner, I have this picture. He goes, so there's a factual dispute. And his big factual dispute is Jason Meade didn't stop. Jason Meade said Casey Goodson stopped at the intersection to let the car go by, and he didn't stop. Whoa! That means the gun didn't come back. Jason Meade, no evidence contrary. That's what happens when you start from a premise and you work backwards. What also happens, ladies and gentlemen, is you stand up in closing like Mr. Schroyer did, and you talk about locking the car. You talk about, Casey Goodson got out of the car and locked the car. That's why they ask the questions about, hey, the car can't lock remotely to the family members. The keys did that. What shred or scintilla of evidence did they put forth saying that Casey Goodson locked the car when he got out? None. That's how they do it. That's how they roll. They put 0 up there in it. What happens when you start with a premise and you work backwards? You have 3 competing theories: reckless, knowingly, purposefully. I'm not sure, ladies and gentlemen, how you can have a reckless thought and a purposeful thought, intent, because they have to prove the intent. Those are the 3 elements of in play here, ladies and gentlemen. The 3 elements. Let's look at recklessness. Was Jason Meade reckless at the scene, at the intersection? No. Did he fire his weapon there? No. Did Jason Meade fire his weapon when he saw Casey Goodson at the end of the street? No. That would be reckless. Did Jason Meade fire when Casey Goodson was going away from him and he was pursuing him? No. That would be reckless. They have proven beyond a reasonable doubt, ladies and gentlemen, that there's 3 holes in the door. They have proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the floor plan of the panes. They have proven, but they've also proven, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is a sad case. It's a tragedy. Goes without saying, right? We talked about this in voir dire. It's going to affect you. Absolutely. And what did they do? They, ladies and gentlemen, they first start, and you're told in the jury instructions, ladies and gentlemen, that you can't use sympathy. Okay, good luck. That's what you're tasked. You're tasked to be a clinician back there. Who was a clinician? The coroner. She was almost giddy going through the paths and the bowls and stuff, but what do? First, they start with a picture of the front and back, entrance wounds and exit wounds. And then what do? They go over all 6 entrance wounds and all 3 exit wounds, and the fragments and everything like that. Okay, people start to get emotional. Okay. Then what do? They do the side view. 6 entrance, 3 exits. And they do the exact same thing over again and over again. People start crying in the courtroom, of course. It affects you, of course. Then what do? They take it to another level and they put the pictures, the more people start getting more upset. And you actually see the big hole and the grays and all that. And they have the coroner go through every single path that the bullet, every vital organ that it had. Ladies and gentlemen, they do that, but no one's contesting the cause of death here. No one's contesting the manner of death. You heard us. We stood up and stipulated. The person at the scene is the same person who did the autopsy on it. It's the same person that died as a result of gunshots. No one's contesting it. But that's all they have, ladies and gentlemen. That's all they have. And they keep doing it, and then they do it again today. Their own trajectory expert contradicts their case in theory, ladies and gentlemen. Ms. Creela, she can't tell you the position of the body. She can't tell you the position of the door. She can tell you it wasn't at 0, and she can tell you it wasn't all the way open. And that's all she can tell you. And this is the type of evidence that they put forth, that you're supposed to rely upon the most important of your. They tell you, we settled on 45. We did an arbitrary thing of 45 degrees with the screen door. She has no idea. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way, it could be all the way up to 89. Yes. So what does the government do? They have this picture that they give to Professor Stoughton, who now somehow is a trajectory expert. May I have the Elmo, please? So this picture, right? This picture, ladies and gentlemen, is done with a door at 45-degree angle, arbitrarily put. And look at the trajectory here when you go backwards. That would mean that it was here, okay? Here along these lines. Well, this is the fence. So that means the shell casings would now be over here to the right. That means Jason Meade must have been inside the fence area when he shot. And you know that's not true from Rosser. You know that's not true. So ladies and gentlemen, I don't know why they give it to Professor Stoughton, but that, even at 45 degrees, it can't happen that way. And that's their proof, ladies and gentlemen. This is what happens, ladies and gentlemen, when you start from a premise and you work backwards. Jason Meade told you that he thought he was complying when he shrugged his shoulders down, and Jason stopped going forward. He thought he was complying, and then he turned. He can't tell you which foot was up, which position, couldn't see this, couldn't see it, didn't see the keys, didn't see, no. He could only tell you that he couldn't see his hands when his back was to him, but when he came back, 3 holes in the door. Focus on that door. That's the case. Caleb Worley, what did he testify to? The gun guy, likes his job, good at it. Caleb Worley, right? Caleb Worley, what is that? What do they do? They have him parade that scary weapon, that big weapon, how much bigger it is than the handgun. That's the rifle that he's issued on SWAT team. Their expert was issued the same thing when he was for the Tallahassee Police Department. But what do? They parade it in front of you. Slowly, click, click, click. That's what they do to you. For 55 minutes, he testifies about that type of stuff because it's got a sight, because it does this, it does that. It's the issued rifle. What did he really testify to, ladies and gentlemen? This is where it really gets difficult for the government. This is what he really testified to, ladies and gentlemen, is that the 6 shell casings found at the scene all came from the rifle. Whoa! Alert, alert. We acknowledge that. That any of the projectiles that were found at the scene or fragments most likely did come from the weapon. Yes. No one's saying it didn't. But they put them up there for the effect of that. Whew. He had such an advantage with that rifle. But what did he really say, ladies and gentlemen? Ms. Stevens cross-examined him. What did he really say? He said, safety. You're trained. You never point a gun at something unless you intend to shoot. And that's how law enforcement officers are trained to respond. You never point at something unless you're going to shoot. And again, it's a distraction. It doesn't matter, ladies and gentlemen, to Mr. Worley, if it's a toy gun, if the gun is unloaded, if the gun doesn't work, or if the safety's on. You would not be able to tell that at 10 to 15 feet apart because that wasn't anything known to Jason Meade at the time, but they've got to throw that out there for you. They've got to try to deceive you on that. Caleb Worley said, Ms. Stevens, I wouldn't be able to see that in any bit. It doesn't matter. That's why you have instructions in there about mistaken, about those types of things. An officer can be mistaken, whether it's a toy gun, fake gun, no gun even. A possession of the gun is irrelevant. You never point a gun at something unless you intend to shoot it. They have a dog and pony show, ladies and gentlemen. They rap with sympathy, they rap with a scary gun, and they want you to fall for that, ladies and gentlemen. But they don't even take the extra steps, ladies and gentlemen. What do they not do? What do they not do in their investigations? No one in their investigation, Ms. Creela said, yeah, I would have really liked a rifle. I would have tested myself to do the ejection pattern. Send the rifle? No. Do they send to Detective Howe the AirPods to see if they're even working, to see if they're paired one off, one? They don't send anything. Do they ask Korn, them, or the FBI about social medias? Absolutely not, because they don't want to know. Do they go and find the picture that's missing from there with the trajectory? No, because they don't want to do those things. You don't distract unless you have something to hide. That's what they do, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about the whole case and the truth of the case. This case is about the whole picture. Who gave you the whole picture? Who shined a light on the entire case? We did. Our case in chief. You would have never heard from Sheila Staniford had we not called her. You would never have heard that she corroborated our client by saying, I heard the commands 3 times, then I heard the shots. They kept her from you. They knew what she said. They had the tape recording, but it doesn't fit their theory. We called her. We shined a light on the whole picture. If we didn't call Ryan Rosser, ladies and gentlemen, you wouldn't have corroboration about many things. First of all, that he stopped and told me a guy's got a gun. Do you think Ryan Rosser believed Jason Meade when Jason Meade said guy's got a gun? Absolutely. That's why he did the U-turn. We gotta go, guy's got a gun. Again, what does Ryan Rosser tell you? At first I thought maybe it was Barber, he came back or something like that. But then when we got up there, and went past the Barber residence, I realized it wasn't Barber. What does he corroborate next, ladies and gentlemen? That he pointed him out and then the person fled. Ryan Rosser corroborates that. We called Ryan Rosser. As he pulls up, what does Ryan Rosser hear? Show me your hands, show me your hands. We called Ryan Rosser. We shed the light. You would never have heard from them if we didn't call them. There's no recordings of it. There's no body-worn camera. No, the U.S. Marshals doesn't allow it. How do we corroborate that if we don't call David Youngless, you will never hear that Jason aired what he aired at the time he saw it. Their theory, ladies and gentlemen, is so outlandish. They think someone with Jason Meade's training, someone who's honorable discharge from the Marines, who you don't get honorable discharge from the Marines if you delete stuff. You don't get it. You don't get honorable discharge if you lie. But he airs it and says it, but their theory is he didn't see it. It's a cover-up. You don't hear the actual question Officer Phillips asked Jason unless we play the whole clip. You don't hear it. The question was, what was the call? How'd I miss the call? Not, why did you fire your weapon? Ladies and gentlemen, a reasonable doubt is doubt based on reason and common sense. In this case, the state's own evidence, ladies and gentlemen, and the conclusions they ask you to make insult your common sense. It's insulting. Our case is real simple, real straightforward. 2 things we have to prove. Number 1, more likely than not, a smidge over 50%. Number 1, more likely than not, was Jason Meade placed in a situation in which he had believed there was an immediate threat when the gun came back, and he had to use lethal force. Number 1, did he perceive that? Did he believe that? We've proven to you that more likely than not. Number 2, we have to show that from the interactions, from the time he saw that gun to use deadly force is reasonable based on the totality of the circumstances that he observed. And then you put a reasonable police officer in his shoes. And is that something that a reasonable police officer could believe as well to use deadly force? That's what we have to prove, more likely than not. You can find that they didn't meet their burden, and your analysis stops. You can find they don't meet their burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, your analysis stops. If you find that they did meet their burden, then you have to go to ours, more likely than not. If you find that we met ours, and you find that they met theirs, it must be not guilty. Our burden, even though it's lower, trumps theirs. That's just the law, ladies and gentlemen. You might be sad about it, you might not agree with it, that's the way the law works. Because officers are afforded that type of deference because of the danger of their jobs. So we have to refer you in the jury instructions when you go back there to the calculus of reasonableness. the calculus of reasonableness. Here's what's in the jury instructions. The Graham factors. We talked about them on voir dire. Mr. Davis talked about them. Stoughton talked about them. But the Graham factors. Number one, severity of crime at issue. Waving a gun, pointing a gun, running away through a neighborhood, everyone testified is a severe crime. Is it more likely than not the severity of the crime? Yes, we've proven that factor more likely than not. All law enforcement officers said that that's a dangerous situation. We don't have to prove that that's a deadly threat right then, ladies and gentlemen, but we have to prove more likely than not that the waving of a gun and fleeing with a gun is dangerous. Number two, whether the suspect posed an immediate threat, okay? And there is no higher threat, ladies and gentlemen, than when an officer's staring down the barrel of a gun. There is no higher threat. And there is nothing more that's immediate or imminent than that, ladies and gentlemen. And we have proven that more likely than not. Another Graham factor you'll see in there was the suspect attempting to evade. More likely than not, based on what Ryan Rosser said and based on what Jason Meade said, was it more likely than not that he was attempting to evade? Yes. They both testified that Jason had his stuff on. There's the guy. He turned and looked at us, and he fled. That's what they observed. That's what they perceived. And a reasonable officer in those shoes would perceive that as evading as well, ladies and gentlemen. The next one, you're to consider situations with furtive gestures or sudden turns. Do we have that here? Yes. There's a sudden turn with the gun, and that's when he sees the gun. Your next Graham factor you're to consider is, did he ignore commands? Yes. You heard Sheila Staniford say that she heard the commands. You heard Jason Meade say he told them, and you heard Ryan Rosser say you hear him. You're not going to hear it, see in there, why did he ignore the commands? That's not the analysis. And I know that that's hard because this is such a devastating case. But that's not the analysis. Based on the observations, did the person not listen to commands? More likely than not, yes. Commands were given, he never stopped. Commands were yelled by someone in the Marines, by someone in 18 years of law enforcement. They weren't talked. The next factor that you'll read in the jury instructions is, was the suspect possibly armed? Again, more likely than not, 100%. Whether this occurred during a chase? Yes, more likely than not. The next one is the duration of the confrontation. The duration of the confrontation is important because how fast things change. They go from up in the intersection to this. Once he ran with the gun to an unknown place, an unknown address, no matter what someone says, police are trained to expect the unexpected. Police have to believe that there's nefarious intent going on. Police have to believe that. That's how they're trained, because it's not normal for someone to be waving and pointing a gun in an intersection, to then be eluding police. That's not normal activity. You don't just go, hey, I'm here to talk to the guy about, no. But that's the distraction they want you to have. What's not in there is tactics, ladies and gentlemen. What's not in there is generally accepted practices. This case is about what happened from the time of that incident to the shooting in the doorway. And my client told you, I didn't shoot when he was running. I didn't shoot. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't. He was placed in every officer's nightmare situation. And he had to respond. We started off closing, ladies and gentlemen, talking about the tragedies in the two families. Those tragedies will never go away. No verdict that you give back in this case will ever take those tragedies away. There is no verdict, ladies and gentlemen, that will bring Casey Goodson back. There's not. There is no burden that will heal both sides of this courtroom, ladies and gentlemen. There is no verdict. There's no power to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, you do have the power, though. You do have the power to prevent a third tragedy And a third tragedy would be to rely upon evidence that they put forth, either in their direct or their case and rebuttal, ladies and gentlemen, or their cross-examination. That would be the tragedy, ladies and gentlemen, if you allowed that, because we have proven our case more likely than not, that our client was faced with an imminent, immediate threat, and that he had to use lethal force. And we have proven that more likely than that, ladies and gentlemen. I wish you good luck in your deliberations and Godspeed, and I thank you for your time. Thank you.
Councilwoman approach.